She was 16, full of life, and carried a curiosity that stretched far beyond the quiet streets of Greenville, Texas. Jane Harlow moved through her world with an energy that made even ordinary days feel electric. She laughed easily, spoke honestly, and held her friends close. Her family loved her fiercely. Her mother, Linda, protective and warm. Her father, Frank, steady and practical. And her younger brother, Tommy, who idolized his sister in ways he would never say out loud. The Harlow home smelled of fresh bread on Sundays and the faint floral scent Jane always wore, a small rebellion against the ordinary. It was late April, and the town carried the lingering warmth of spring evenings. Jane had just finished her shift at the diner and was looking forward to bowling with Mark, her boyfriend. The alley buzzed with the smell of oil, the clatter of pins, and the hum of neon lights. She smiled as she and Mark took their shoes off, careful not to trip on the slick floor. For those hours, the world shrank to the lanes, the laughter, the simple joy of strikes and spares. By the time they left, the air had grown cooler and the neon of blue lanes flickered behind them. The parking lot was mostly empty, the spaces stretching into shadows that seemed longer than usual. Mark held her hand as they walked to his car, the tires crunching softly against the asphalt. And then they saw him, a figure standing too still, too deliberate, just beyond the edge of the lot. It happened so quickly. Mark's world fractured in a moment. The man lunged, a silver glint catching Jane's eye, a ring, ornate and strange, catching the fading light. He shoved Mark to the ground, violent and precise. Jane struggled, kicked, screamed, but the hand clamping over her mouth was iron. The struggle was brief but devastating. She was pulled toward a dark vehicle, a shadow swallowing her, leaving only the echo of her scream. Mark, battered and terrified, stumbled toward the nearest phone to call for help. Greenville awoke to panic. The parking lot, usually mundane and familiar, became the epicenter of fear. Police officers sealed the area, questioning witnesses, chasing every detail that might lead to Jane. People remembered flashes, a dark vehicle, the glint of a ring, the muffled cry of a girl. But every lead twisted into nothingness. It was as if she had evaporated into the night itself. Even in those early hours, small clues emerged. A strand of hair, a fiber from her jacket, faint tire tracks pressed into the soft asphalt. Each was collected meticulously, catalogued and shelved, seemingly inconsequential. At the time, they were whispers in the case files, but they would become keys decades later. Weeks passed with no real progress. Mark relived the night endlessly. The ring burned into his memory. Jane's parents drove through empty streets calling her name in the dark, retracing every path she had taken. The town was suffused with quiet dread. Lights burned late into the night in homes, doors locked, windows watched. Rumors began to coil around every corner. Had Jane run away? Was it a random attack? A gang initiation? And then came the first tangible lead. An anonymous tip suggested the old mill road near the bridge. Officers found tire tracks, cigarette butts, and a fragment of Jane's jacket, half buried in the dirt. Detective Harold Quinn, seasoned and patient, knew immediately that this was no ordinary crime. Whoever had done this knew the area well. The abduction had been planned, deliberate. Months of searching uncovered more. Abandoned houses, hidden wells, and burned-out shacks. A locket engraved with Jane's initials was found carefully hidden, a breadcrumb in a path only someone familiar with her world could have laid. It hinted that she had been alive days after the abduction, but her trail remained elusive. The investigation widened. Police revisited decades-old files and discovered Glenn McCurley, a man with a history of assaults near similar locations. He lived quietly in Greenville, unnoticed, blending into ordinary life. Though there was no immediate proof tying him to Jane, a quiet tension grew. DNA technology, still nascent in the 70s, would one day reveal the truth hidden in a single strand of hair collected that night. Meanwhile, the town's anxiety intensified. Letters arrived at the police headquarters, cryptic and taunting, suggesting the crime was part of a larger network. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, each word chosen to provoke fear while revealing nothing. Tire tracks, fragments of possessions, and faint impressions in forgotten places became threads that would later weave into a full tapestry of truth. Through it all, Jane's presence was palpable. Each discovery, each tiny clue suggested someone had kept her close, watched her, manipulated the shadows around her. It was as if the night she disappeared had been the start of a meticulous plan, one that had been unfolding in quiet, hidden corners of Greenville for years. Detectives knew that the solution would not come quickly. Each piece of evidence required patience, each connection demanded scrutiny. But the first spark of hope had been lit. Somewhere, hidden in the town or perhaps beyond it, Jane's story waited to be fully revealed, and for Detective Quinn, that spark was enough to keep searching, to keep piecing together a puzzle that had begun in a single, terrible night and would not rest until every secret had been uncovered. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet Jane remained missing. The town of Greenville moved cautiously, as if stepping too quickly might break the fragile sense of normalcy left behind. The Harlows' lives were suspended in a haze of worry. Linda Harlow spent hours in Jane's room, touching the objects her daughter had left behind, inhaling her perfume in vain, clutching the books she had loved and rereading the notes Jane had written in her neat handwriting. Mark combed over maps and police reports with meticulous care, charting every clue, every lead, every scrap of evidence, hoping for something, anything that might point them toward her. The investigation pressed on. Officers interviewed anyone who had been near the alley, anyone who had been driving by, anyone who might have noticed something out of the ordinary. But the memories of witnesses were fractured, incomplete, often contradictory. One man had seen a dark vehicle parked at the far end of the lots but couldn't remember the license plate. Another recalled a figure standing near the edge of the lights, but his description shifted with each telling. The case was a tangle of half-truths and uncertainties. Yet there were threats, small and persistent. A fragment of Jane's jacket discovered near the creek, slightly torn and dirt-streaked, hinted at a struggle, and nearby tire tracks suggested someone had parked and lingered. A locket, engraved with initials barely visible under dirt, was found in a hollow tree, an echo of Jane herself. Each piece was catalogued, examined, and filed. Alone they meant little, but together they were whispers of a story waiting to be understood. Detective Quinn, experienced and patient, began tracing the edges of the town, the forgotten alleys, abandoned properties, and long-ignored roads. He was certain the abduction had not been random. Whoever had taken Jane knew the area intimately, moving with the confidence of someone who understood the rhythms of the town and its people. Then came Glenn McCurley. His name appeared in the dusty files of old investigations, assaults that had been unresolved, strange disappearances near Greenville, patterns that no one had connected at the time. He lived quietly, worked in odd jobs, maintained a facade of normalcy. He had neighbors, acquaintances, and no obvious motive. And yet something in the consistency of old reports suggested that he was more than he appeared, a man capable of careful, deliberate action. Months of surveillance revealed little. McCurley's routines were ordinary, predictable, designed to blend into the town. But detectives noticed anomalies: trips at odd hours, unexplained absences, interactions with people who had no apparent reason to be connected to him. He was meticulous, patient, and careful, a man who had learned to hide in plain sight. Meanwhile, Greenvale residents whispered. Some were certain Jane had been spirited away by strangers. Others suspected someone within the community, someone they had trusted. Letters began to appear at the police station, cryptic, carefully written, as if testing the investigators' resolve. "You've seen one wall. How many others do you think there are?" Throughout it all, Jane's presence felt alive in the smallest details: a smudge on a floor, a faint footprint, the faint outline of an object in a photograph. Each whispered her resilience, her existence, her path. Hidden clues suggested she had left marks of her own, subtle signs meant to be found by the diligent, the observant, the patient. The town had forgotten them, but the evidence had not forgotten. Then came another cryptic letter. This one was different, urgent, almost personal. "Do not trust the quiet corners. She leaves pieces behind. See what the others have missed." It hinted that the network involved more than one person, that McCurley may have had help or observers. Detectives began looking deeper, analyzing context, phone records, and financial transactions. Minor inconsistencies now seemed significant. Small purchases, odd accounts, a rented storage unit that had gone unnoticed for years. At the same time, Jane's family continued their own search, quietly, almost in parallel. Linda Harlow made connections with former friends of Jane's, tracing memories, photographs, and belongings. Mark followed his own hunches, revisiting the bowling alley, the parking lot, the streets where Jane had walked. Each of them collected fragments: a discarded notebook, an old sweater, a worn shoe that could now be cross-referenced with police findings. The investigation began to reveal a chilling pattern. Jane's abduction was not random, nor was it simply a moment of violence. It had been orchestrated, and over the years, maintained. Every location, every object, every interaction had been calculated, observed, and in some cases, left as breadcrumbs, either for Jane herself or for those who might seek justice decades later. The detective's patience was finally rewarded when forensic reanalysis confirmed multiple small clues that had been previously overlooked. Fibers from Jane's jacket, now analyzed with modern technology, matched other pieces found in locations associated with McCurley. The locket's clasp contained microscopic traces of materials from the same storage units he had rented. The tire tracks from different locations matched the pattern of his known vehicles over years. It was meticulous, painstaking work, but the hidden map was emerging. Even the letters became part of the puzzle. Handwriting analysis, cross-referenced with past reports, suggested a second hand, a collaborator who had observed but never acted overtly. The network that had kept Jane hidden for so long was slowly, methodically being revealed. And as detectives followed these threads, each lead brought them closer to uncovering not just where Jane had been, but the full scope of the abduction's orchestration. Finally, it became clear. McCurley's careful life of blending in, of ordinary routines, was a facade. Underneath, there had been decades of planning, surveillance, and manipulation. He had left fragments, small, almost invisible, that hinted at his involvement, but only those willing to trace them across time could see the full picture. Jane's presence, her courage, and the tiniest details she left behind had guided the investigation toward truth. And yet, the detectives knew they were on the edge of something bigger. The network, the accomplices, the hidden paths, these were threads that required precision, patience, and strategy. One wrong move could let decades of careful planning go unnoticed again. But for the first time in years, Quinn and his team felt a spark of certainty. The hidden trail was real. It was there, scattered across Greenvale and beyond, and it would lead them to Jane Harlow, and to those responsible for the life that had been stolen. The years of quiet investigation were about to bear fruit. Detective Quinn and his team had pieced together a network that had once been invisible, hidden in plain sight across Greenville. Each thread of evidence, Joan's locket, the microscopic fibers, the tire tracks matched across locations, the cryptic letters, and behavioral evidence formed an unbroken chain toward a singular, unavoidable conclusion. Glenn McCurley, the man who had lived among ordinary streets and blended seamlessly into the town, was no longer just a suspect. He was the architect of Jane Harlow's disappearance, and justice was within reach. But DNA alone would not be enough. Decades had passed, and the law demanded contemporary proof. The detectives planned meticulously, knowing that a single misstep could shatter their work. McCurley had lived quietly for years, careful, calculated, and observant. Approaching him required precision. Under the guise of reviewing an old case, officers scheduled an interview designed to collect a sample without raising alarm. Every movement was deliberate, every word in the script rehearsed. Meanwhile, the town was on edge. Rumors of breakthroughs circulated, whispered between neighbors, spread in hushed tones at diners and grocery stores. Mark, older now, had begun to reconnect with Jane's friends from the past. Together, they shared memories, fragments, and theories, forming a collective puzzle that mirrored the police investigation. Each recollection, each detail, added weight to the already growing mountain of evidence. When McCurley left for the interview, the detectives watched him closely. His posture was calm, his expression neutral, but beneath the surface, subtle signs betrayed his awareness. The room was quiet, too quiet, as if the very walls were listening. Detective Quinn guided the conversation carefully, circling old locations, old events, and old names. McCurley responded predictably, maintaining a facade of innocence, until the discussion turned to Jane. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a brief hesitation, a tightening of the jaw. Detective Quinn noticed. Officers continued to press gently, subtly observing reactions, collecting behavioral evidence that would later support the forensic findings. Then a breakthrough. McCurley, unaware of a tiny hidden device capturing a trace sample, inadvertently provided the DNA match needed to link him conclusively to Jane's abduction. The evidence was undeniable. Forensic science had caught up to decades-old planning. The minute strand of hair, once inconclusive, now screamed with clarity, pointing directly to McCurley. Fibers from Jane's locket, tire tracks matched across locations, cryptic letters, and behavioral evidence formed an unbroken chain. The detectives had finally connected all the pieces. With the match confirmed, the team moved swiftly but cautiously. McCurley's home and known haunts were surveilled, ensuring no chance of escape. When the moment arrived, officers approached him with precision. He was taken into custody without incident, confronted with the totality of the evidence that had eluded justice for decades. His calm exterior faltered only once when confronted with the sheer inevitability of the forensic proof. At the same time, further investigation revealed fragments of the network he had relied on, accomplices who had remained silent, locations used to manipulate and control Jane. Cryptic notes and photographs indicated careful observation, mapping her life and movements in a way that had made the abduction feel almost invisible for years. Each revelation painted a picture of cold calculation, but also left subtle clues that Jane herself might have left behind, guiding those determined to uncover the truth. Mark and Jane's family were notified. Emotions surged in ways words could not contain. Relief, terror, sorrow, and anger intermingled. The long-lost trail of Jane's presence, hidden in plain sight for decades, was now coming together, offering a chance for understanding, closure, and reckoning. The detectives reconstructed Jane's movements in the days following her abduction. She had been held in temporary locations, moved strategically, observed, and occasionally left with small signs, the locket, minor personal items that she might have hoped someone would find. These subtle breadcrumbs told a story of endurance, resilience, and intelligence. Jane had not simply vanished, she had survived, at least long enough to leave the hidden marks that ultimately guided investigators to McCurley. Interrogation of McCurley was relentless, but methodical. He revealed details of his planning, the careful orchestration of each move, and the network he had relied on. The letters, once cryptic and teasing, were explained as part of a psychological game he maintained, a control mechanism over both Jane and those seeking her. Yet his arrogance had been his undoing. The smallest fragment, overlooked for decades, had spoken louder than his intentions. The town of Greenville, upon learning of the arrest, was a mixture of relief and disbelief. For decades they had walked the streets in a subtle fear, unsure of who among them might harbor darkness. Now the shadow had been lifted, replaced by a grim but tangible reality. A man responsible had been found, confronted, and held accountable. Meanwhile, Jane's family faced the complicated emotions of closure. The relief that justice had finally arrived was tempered by the sorrow of years lost and the haunting knowledge of what she endured. Every photograph, every object, every detail of the investigation reminded them of both the cruelty of the crime and the perseverance of those who refused to let it remain unsolved. As the legal proceedings began, the evidence was laid bare. The forensic connections, corroborated witness statements, the locket, the fibers, the DNA, all pointed unambiguously to McCurley. The letters were introduced as a demonstration of premeditation and the breadth of his manipulative control.